Hello friends, myself Dr. Nidhi Darbari on My Education Treasure. In my previous video on Mimansa philosophy, I had discussed about the perception, comparison and verbal testimony of Mimansa philosophy. Today, in my present video, I will be discussing about the Arthapatti or postulation and Anuplabdhi or non-apprehension as non-perceptual sources of knowledge of Mimansa philosophy. Arthapatti or postulation. Postulation or arthapatti is the necessary supposition of an unperceived fact which alone can explain a phenomena that demands explanation. When a given phenomena is such that we cannot understand it in any way without supposing some other fact, we have to postulate this other fact by way of explaining inexplicable phenomena by the affirmation of the explaining fact is called arthapatti. Thus, when a man who is growing fat is observing fast during the day, we find an apparent contradiction between his growing fatness and his fasting. We cannot in any way reconcile these two facts, namely fatness and fasting, unless we admit that the man eats at night. The man must rest at night explains the complex whole of apparently conflicting facts, namely the fasting with increasing fatness. In order to clarify this, we need to postulate that this may be due to heredity or because he eats during night. Unless we postulate this, we cannot explain fatness of that person. This is postulation. This knowledge cannot be brought under perception or inference. The person eating in the night is not perceived by us, nor is there any inseparable relation between eating in the night and becoming fat. Knowledge obtained in this way is distinctive because it is not reducible to perception or inference, and it is not, of course, a case of testimony or comparison. Such knowledge cannot be explained as perception since we do not see the man eat at night, nor is it a case of inference because there is no invariable concomitance between fatness and eating at night. So we cannot say that whenever there is fatness, there is eating at night, as we can see that wherever there is smoke, there is fire. Though we are not ordinarily aware of it, we employ this method, arthapatti, very often in daily life. Some examples will make this clear. When we call a friend and do not find him at home, though we are sure that he is alive, we may say he must be somewhere outside home. This last supposition is made by us because this alone can explain how a man who is alive cannot be at home. This method is also largely used by us in the interpretation of language. When some words are admitted in a sentence, we suppose those words without which meaning implied by context cannot be explained on reading or hearing a sentence like shut up, we supply by arthapatti the words your lips because without them the meaning is incomplete. Similarly, when the primary meaning of a word does not suit the context, we suppose a secondary or figurative meaning which alone can explain the sentence. For example, when we are told industry is the key to success, we suppose that the meaning to key here must be means and not a real key. Mimamsakas distinguish between two kinds of postulation or arthapatti. Dishtarthapatti, that is, that which is employed to explain something which is perceived. Dishtarthapatti, such as fatness in a man who is fasting by day. and Shrutarthapatti, that which is used to explain the meaning of words heard. Shrutarth, that is, on hearing shut up, we supply the sentence your lips, such as those cited above. It will be found that Arthapatti resembles a hypothesis and another as understood in Western logic. It appears to be like an explanatory hypothesis, but the difference is that it lacks the tentative or provisional character of a hypothesis. What is known by Arthapatti is not simply hypothetically supposed or entertained, but is believed in as only possible explanation. Arthapatti arises out of a demand for explanation. It is different from a syllogistic inference, the object of which is to conclude from the given fact and not to explain given fact. Arthapatti is a search for ground, whereas an inference is a search for consequent. What is known by Arthapatti is believed to be only possible explanation. It arises out of demand for explanation. Thus, Arthapatti is a search for ground. According to Prabhakar, there is an element of doubt in presumption, and this element of doubt is what distinguishes it from inference, as there is no element of doubt in inference. However, according to Kamarel, there is no element of doubt in presumption. Anuplabdhi or non-apprehension or non-perception. Anuplabdhi is a separate and an independent source of knowledge. This source of knowledge is accepted by one of the schools of Mimansa, namely Bhatt school and Advait Vedant. According to the Bhatt, Mimansa and the Advait Vedant, non-perception and anuplabdhi is a source of our immediate cognition of the non-existence of an object. The question here is how I know the non-existence of a jar on the table before me. It cannot be said that I perceive it with my senses, because non-existence is a negative factor which cannot stimulate any sense as a positive fact that the table can. The Bhatts and the Advaitins hold, therefore, that the non-existence of the jar, the table, is known from the absence of its cognition, that is, from its non-perception or anuplabdhi. If we already possess the knowledge of a universal relation between non-perception and non-existence, that is, if we know that when an object is not perceived, it does not exist, thus it would be begging the question or assumption of the very thing which was sought to be proved by inference, nor can we explain the knowledge of the jar non-existence by comparison or testimony. Since it is not due to any knowledge of similarity of the jar's non-existence, we have to recognize non-perception. It is the source of immediate knowledge of non-existence of an object, that is, if an object should have been perceived under certain circumstances, then its non-perception under those circumstances give knowledge of its non-existence, that is, knowledge from appropriate non-perception. To Bhatt school, non-perception is the source of our immediate knowledge of non-existence of a thing. I say that jar does not exist here only because I do not perceive it. This is non-perception. That is, we should not conclude that all non-perception leads to the conclusion of non-existence of what is not perceived. We do not perceive a table in the dark, nor do we perceive such supersensible entities as atoms, ether, virtue, vice, etc., yet we do not judge them to be non-existence. Why? This is because if things should have been perceived under certain circumstances, only then its non-perception under those circumstances would give us the knowledge of non-existence of that entity. The supersensible entities are those that are beyond our senses. So we cannot say that they are non existent when we do not see them. Prabhakar does not recognize non-apprehension as an independent means of valid knowledge or praman. He also denies non existence as reality and non apprehension as a means of knowing it. He says when we perceive a jar on the ground, we perceive the existence of ground as related to the existence of the jar, but when the jar is absent, we perceive the background only. If you found the video to be informative and interesting, I request you all to please give a like to the video to motivate me, share it with others and subscribe it so that whenever I upload a new video, you will get a notification. Kumaral Bhatt regards non-apprehension as a means of knowing the non-existence of an object, that is, non-existence is real and apprehended by non-perception. For example, a person perceived the bare ground, then remembers a jar which existed on it, then recognizes the non-existence of the jar on the ground by means of non-perception. Kumaral Bhatt says non-existence of an object can never be recognized by perception, nor it can be inferred because invariable concomitance between them is not known, nor non-existence can be known by testimony, comparison, presumption. Hence, it can be known only by appropriate non-apprehension, a distant means of valid knowledge. Thank you very much for patiently watching the video and don't forget to subscribe.